So let's now start working on the code and let's see how we can then leverage Git to track our local code changes. And for this, we of course have this starting project. I want to go to app.js and start adding some changes there. In there, I want to make sure that we add logic that allows us to show or hide this shopping cart overlay window. And actually, Manu and I decided to split the work here. I will just add the logic for controlling that we show or hide some content, and the concrete content, the cart overlay, that is something Manu will add in a second step thereafter. Now, I'm going to write a little bit of React code for that, but again, you don't need to know that. You can just follow along and type the same code I do to successfully add this feature. It's not a lot of code, no worries. What we need to do is at the very top of app.js, we need to add an import statement by typing import and then there between curly braces, use state from React. With that, in case you're interested, we are importing a feature provided by the React library, a third-party library that is part of our dependencies that allows us to track so-called state in this app. And we can use this state concept to change what's visible on the screen. Now we use this use state thing, which we import here in this app function, which is basically some predefined code that will be executed automatically by React once it starts displaying something on the screen. And in this app function, we now use state, so we type use state, and then we execute it as a function, which means we add parentheses after use state and then a semicolon. This is JavaScript code for executing a function, which means for running some code that was defined in another place. In this case, for executing some code that was defined by the React team in the React library. Now, use state here then actually returns values, so it gives us some values. And in JavaScript, we can store such values with this syntax here. We can write const and then square brackets, and then between the square brackets, type cart is shown, comma, set cart is shown. And this might look very cryptic if you have never worked with programming languages or JavaScript before, but in the end, what we're doing here is we are getting a value that allows us to find out what the current state is that we're trying to manage here. And then a second value, which itself is a function, so code we can execute in the future, that allows us to change that state. And we will then soon manage a state that controls whether the cart overlay should be shown or not. Now, to use state, we also pass a value, as it's called, by adding a value between those parentheses, and that's the false value, which means that the starting state for this state in this app function here is false, which means initially this cart overlay should not be visible. Now we got this code here. The other code which I want to add here are then two other functions, so more functions that can be executed at a certain point in time in the future or upon a certain event. And that would be the show cart handler function and the hide cart handler function. In the end, these are just two dummy functions which I add here, where in show cart handler, I will use this set cart is shown function, which I mentioned allows us to change the state to true. And in hide cart handler, I set it to false. And the idea is that if we then would trigger these functions, for example, upon a click on this button here, then we would either show the cart or hide it. So now we're almost done here. The last steps that are missing is that we now need to connect this show cart handler function to a trigger that should, well, execute this function. And in this case, we connect it to this header thing here, which you find a little bit further down in the app.js file, by adding a onShowCart attribute, as it's called. And then you add an equal sign thereafter, curly braces, and then the name of this show cart handler function, which we defined up here. This in the end tells React that this function, which controls our card state, should be executed when something special happens in our header here, which is this navigation bar at the top. Again, if you don't fully follow along here, that's no problem. It's just some React code, which will do the trick for us here. Now, the last step now for this git commit, which I'll add soon, is that I'll use this state, this card is shown state here, to then show something on the screen. And in React, we do this by adding curly braces here between card provider and header. And here we then type card is shown, and then two ampersand symbols, two and symbols, and then just a div where I say card ... This is the part Manu will work on later. We'll replace this with different content in the future, but what we added here is the logic for managing whether the card should be visible or not. The thing that's missing is the card itself, so the overlay is missing, but that's a feature Manu will be working on. Now if I save this, I haven't created any git commits yet, but I can still save this. If I now reload this page, you won't see a difference. If I click this button, if you watch closely, you'll see a little jump in that window here. If I reload, you see this jumps. That's because some content, some dummy content, is added behind this navigation bar. But again, the real content that we want to show is still missing. So now with that, we manipulated the code and we applied our code changes. Now this is still a Git and GitHub course, and therefore that's enough about React for now. I will now again quit this development server by pressing Ctrl+C. And then here, I want to create a new git commit. However, I'm working on a new feature here. Controlling this card visibility logic is a new feature. The app was kind of working before as well. Now I just added a new feature, and therefore I don't want to immediately add this in my main branch, because other people might be working on that as well. They might be adding bug fixes there and so on. Instead, I'll create a separate feature branch, which I only want to add once I thoroughly tested this and I'm happy to merge it into the main branch. And therefore, what I'll do here is I will not run git add here, but instead I'll first create a new branch. And I can create a new branch with ease by running git checkout -b to check out into a new branch, and then entering the name of that new branch which I want to have. And in my case, I'll name the branch feat/cardlogic. The name is totally up to you. It's just a convention I personally like, where I have feat/ to signal that this is a branch that contains a new feature, and then some name that describes the feature. With that, I'm now in that new branch. Here, we see that this is the active branch. And now I'll run git add and then git commit to create a commit in that new branch. Which means in the main branch, we don't have that commit, just in that new branch. And here, I'll just describe my commit with added card visibility state, because that's in the end what I did here. Hit enter, and now this was committed. Now we have these two branches. The main branch is still our starting state without that feature. The feature branch, on the other hand, does have this feature now. And now, as I said, I'm not working on this project alone. Instead, Manuel is working on this project as well, and therefore, of course, it's not enough if I just have these changes and this Git repository on my local machine.